In this video, we're going to talk about web storage. So in the old days, cookies were the only option we had for storing data on a user system. But cookies have downsides. If you remember the diagrams early in the first videos, cookies get passed around to the server and back from the server with every HTTP request, and that adds traffic, and that's not always a great thing. A cookie can only store about 4K, 4,000 bytes of data. So now more modern web browsers have something called web storage that we can process with JavaScript on the browser. And it's got several advantages over cookies. First of all, the data isn't passed back and forth with every HTTP request. Web storage can also hold more, like 5 megabytes of data, which is a bunch more. And the code that you use to work with web storage is way easier to understand and shorter to read. So web storage includes local storage and session storage. And the difference between those two is that local storage is like a persistent cookie. It's local storage is what will stay between browser sessions. Session storage only stays active for as long as that session is active. And we'll see some examples of that. So let's look at the code we can use to do local storage first. So we can say local storage dot set item, and we can just name a key and a value. That easy. Okay, so local storage dot set item, name the key, give its value. We can also do local storage dot get item, specify the key, and it will return the value. If you've used dictionaries in Python or maps in other languages, you're used to doing this. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Local storage dot remove item key will delete that key and its values from local storage. And we can do local storage dot clear, which will remove all the items. Okay. Similarly, we can do the same thing with session storage. Session storage dot set item, we can name a key value pair. We can do a get item and specify the key, and that will return the value that's set for that key. We can also do a session storage dot remove item and remove a particular key, and we can do session storage dot clear to clear out all the keys and values. Pretty easy compared to the string manipulation and things that we had to do with cookies. But it gets even easier because there's a shortcut syntax. We can just say local storage dot key. And if we say equals and give a value, it's assigning something to that key. If we're using this and assigning it to something else, it's actually going to get the key or get the value assigned to that key. So we can just use local storage dot key or session storage dot key the exact same way. And we'll see some examples coming up of both of these. So this is a piece of JavaScript that does something called a hit counter. Hit counters used to be really popular back in the early days of web. Everybody wanted to know how many times somebody was coming to their website. There are much better ways to do that now. Instead of using JavaScript and storing it locally on people's computers. This isn't exactly the same thing, but it's pretty good. Most web servers and stuff have analytics built in that tells you way more information than this now. But let's take a look at what this does. Once our document ready runs, we're local storage dot hits. So we have in our local storage, we have a key called hits. So we're using that in if. Okay. So if that hits key exists, meaning we've already got the value there, we've used it before, we're going to local storage dot hits, we're going to set that value to this right here, which is get the current value, local storage dot hits, change it to an integer, that's the parse int part, add 1 to it, and then store it back in that number. So we're just adding 1. Every time this runs, we're going to add 1 to this hit counter to tell us how many times our page has been hit, how many times somebody has been to our page. If local storage.hits did not exist, it's going to run the else here, and it's just going to let create local storage.hits and set it equal to 1. Here's another one doing the exact same thing with session storage.hits. So if there is already a session storage value called hits, we're going to take that, we're going to get it, parse it as an integer, add 1 to it, and store it back in session storage.hits. So we're adding 1 to our counter. If it didn't already exist, we're going to create it and set it equal to 1 from the beginning. Okay. And then we'll log out to the console. Hits for this browser. How many times has this browser hit our page? That's why I say it's not really a hit counter for how many people have ever hit this page. It's more of how many times has this browser been to this page. So it's going to keep track of local storage hits and session storage hits. Remember, those two can be different. Local storage is persistent. Session storage is not persistent. So here's an example, and the way this example was generated is that somebody loaded from this browser, they loaded this page 3 times. They loaded it 3 times, then they shut the browser down. Now when they shut the browser down, session got reset to 0. Then they opened it back up and loaded this page 2 more times. So the hits from local storage, because they were persistent, stayed at 3, and then 2 more reloads moved it up to 5. The session, when we shut it down, got set to 0. When the page was reloaded 2 more times, 0 got moved up to 2. So that's the difference. They're just demonstrating the difference between the local storage being persistent and the session storage not being persistent. So the key terms we're talking about here: web storage works with key value pairs. We don't have a lot of decoding to do. Local storage is persistent. Session storage is not persistent. And in the next video, we're going to look at the same app we looked at earlier, which is the task list, but we're going to look at the same application working with web storage instead of traditional cookies.